Welcome back to the Mercy Cast, where we are learning the art of compassion through life's adversity. I'm your host, Raleigh Sadler. Each episode is different, and this one has been really different. I have been trying to talk to our guest multiple times. She was in different cities, different internets. Every time we would try to talk, the computer wouldn't work. I couldn't hear her, she couldn't hear me. And this wasn't happening with any other guests. To be honest, this hasn't happened with any of the guests that I've had over the last 2 years. So Britney and I seem to think that there is something behind this conversation. So I want you to listen in. I want you to lean into this conversation because today I'm joined by Britney Higgs. She is the founder and CEO of the Her Campaign. This is an organization that helps survivors of human trafficking heal, grow, and find purpose. Britney, welcome to the Mercy Cast.
Thanks so much for having me. Finally.
I know, I can hear your voice.
It's crazy. This is going to be a really good conversation.
I think so. We sort of talked. I mean, it was basically like we were sending notes through the app and we were doing all these things to communicate, clapping, doing whatever we could to send communication. But now here we are. And what I noticed in our previous conversations, we have a lot of the same experiences. We both came up in the anti-trafficking movement around the same time. We have both dealt with burnout. We have both wondered if God is still behind this. And then we realize, yes, he's still here. He hasn't let us go. We are tethered. Even in those dark days when it feels difficult, we are tethered. And I think as we've talked, I want to learn more about why you got into this and what keeps you in this.
Yeah. The Lord, he's awesome. It's mysterious. I think when we get called into something, it is a seed that is planted and we don't fully understand or know why we're getting that seed. About 12 years ago, I had a good friend of mine who was going overseas to work with safe houses and help women and children who are coming out of brothels in the red light district in India and Nepal. As I was hearing what human trafficking was, my heart broke in a way that I hadn't been broken before. And you just don't understand exactly why you're breaking. You just know that nothing is going to be different after that moment. That led us on a crazy journey. My husband and I, we were more entrepreneurial. We have film business at this time. And so we felt like the Lord said, use what you have and it will be enough. And so we wanted to bring more awareness to the issue of human trafficking. We started working with NGOs overseas. That took me on a couple trips to Iraq. The first one being in 2015, ISIS had hit Mosul and hundreds of thousands of people are displaced and women and girls were being trafficked through ISIS ranks. And there was a couple organizations that were helping to rescue these girls, reintegrate them into their families in IDP camps. But we got to be on the ground level with these survivors. When I was sitting down with these women and girls that had just been rescued, they were physically safe. They were reintegrated back with their families. And yet over and over again, I heard, I wish I would have just died in captivity. I cried out to the Lord after that trip and said, God, this cannot be the end of their story. I don't see your restoration. I don't see your goodness yet. Even though they are in freedom physically, there's still so much bondage. What do you have for them after this? Long story short, it was that trip in particular that showed me there needs to be a next step. We started doing research, got connected to people here in the US and realized that there are not a lot of places that are the gap between rescue and independence, rescue and freedom. And that's what really kind of started our journey.
It's interesting that you mentioned going over there. And for a season, that was in the headlines every day. This is what's happening with ISIS. This is what's happening in Iraq. And you were there and you were actually talking to the people who were involved. What was that like going from a headline to actually sitting in front of a person and realizing, no, this is real. this is actually happening.
Yeah. It was surreal, and even for me, I was a young mom in my 20s when I got connected with this organization that was going over there. I had never been on a missions trip, much less the Middle East during a wartime. So this was a leap of faith for me. It was definitely that's when our weakness becomes strength through the Lord alone, right? Because there's no way that in my flesh would have chosen to do something like that as a mom of two small boys. It was just, it's so hard to explain, but there's a supernatural thing that comes over you of like, I'm supposed to do this. And there's nothing that can stop me from being obedient to what the Lord is asking me to do in this moment. The entire journey was surreal. I needed to dye my hair. I had to wear the whole, get up when we were over there. We were on a trip with pastors and former special ops guys that were leading this mission. When we're over there and we're actually on the ground level, you're seeing the devastation and the effect of what terrorism is doing in this country. It's just surreal. I don't know how else to explain it. What's interesting is I went 5 years later to the same area to also go with that same organization and help the people there. And it was a completely different feel. There had been camps that were more set up and whatnot, and there was a lot more hope and peace in the air. But that first trip, it was just devastation. And the oppression that you even felt over these people, it was tangible.
Yeah. Yeah, that's got to be a lot. You're a young mom at the time. You're going over into a war zone. Your parents probably didn't expect that for you vocationally. Then you're going over there and you're connecting with people in a real way, and that changed you.
Yeah.
This wasn't part of your life before Iraq. Then you said, okay, something needs to change. We need to provide a service. What do you think happens when we actually sit down with vulnerable people and we go past the headlines, we go past the sensational things, and we sit down with someone? What do you think God does in those moments?
I think our humanity becomes so real, and it is one of the most humbling experiences. For instance, one of the survivors that we got to come in contact with, I was 24, 25 years old at the time, and she was the same age. We spent 3 hours on the floor of her little house that had like 10 or 15 people living in this thing with her. She's sharing her story and explaining how she has nothing left. She will never get married, never have kids. She had nothing to hope for. And here I am, a mom and married, sitting with a girl that's the same age as me. And it's just like, it's humanity on display. It's the brokenness of our world. And in that moment, like nothing else matters except for there has to be an answer for her pain. There has to be more for what she's going through. After that, coming back from that trip, I was completely wrecked, completely broken. But in that brokenness is where I think the Lord starts to rebuild us back up into his image, because we understand our humanity, we understand our frailty, we understand the evil that's in this world and what can happen to people. And then it's through that place of brokenness that he starts to enter into the spaces where we desperately need him, where we need to surrender every single piece of ourselves. I think that was the pinnacle point for me, but there is no way that the Lord would have called us into starting a safe house for women until he walked us through our own process of healing and restoration. And we had to understand who he was and who we are in him before he would ever trust us to walk that out with the women that we are walking it out with today.
That makes so much sense. You just mentioned something so important. I feel like you are talking about how our vulnerabilities and our frailty plays into how we love others. And when we don't engage people and we just see them as statistics, it's easier to manage. But when we actually get in that person's space, when we have a conversation, when we look into their eyes, when their burdens start to become ours, that's when things get shaky. That's when our own stuff gets stirred. And it shifts so much in our lives. I would love to hear how your relationship with God changed after that moment, because you're kind of describing God showed you that you and your husband had things to work on. And then just by being in the presence of someone who was experiencing intense vulnerability, and now you're seeing your own, and now you're back home. Describe what happened next.
Yeah. So when I came home from that trip, we actually were offered the potential of a year contract with this organization to go over and just be the documentary filmmakers. And everything in my flesh wanted to do that. I was like, yes, like I'm going to go back. This is what I'm called to. But as my husband and I prayed about it, it was a very clear no.
Mm.
And we didn't understand. I remember being angry with the Lord, thinking, like, what is going on right now? But it was so that he could do the deep work in us and break us down to the bottom level of who we are so that he could start to rebuild us up in that journey. So, to answer your question, God started to show up in ways that we just didn't know he existed. We grew up in great Bible believing families, knew that we were going to go to heaven someday, but the power of the Holy Spirit was not evident in our lives. Like we had never experienced that. And when it came to following him with our all, it just wasn't there yet. And so when we were broken, all of a sudden, the power of the Holy Spirit starts to show up in the craziest ways. My husband and I were having the same dream on the same night and the same message from the Lord. And like waking up the next morning being like, how'd you sleep? Really horrible. Why? Because I had this dream. And I'm like, holy crap, I had that exact same dream. And I feel like the Lord is saying the exact same thing. We now know because of counseling and therapy and what we do with survivors, EMDR is a really big effective thing that we use with the survivors that we serve. And basically in EMDR, it's your left and right brain being activated and memories will come back up. Memories that you have blacked out will come back to the surface, but then it'll be re-registered into the logical brain. So from emotional to logical, so that the pain actually dissipates. What I was going through during that time was the EMDR experience with the Lord. There would be nights when I would be up, memories, some childhood abuse that I went through, memories coming back up for the first time. And I was going through that EMDR experience where it would be so painful for a moment. And then he would put it in the logical part of my brain and I would feel a release on that trauma. And then another memory would come up and he would be doing it. It just was for 2 years. My husband and I were on this healing journey. And the Lord was coming to us. I realize he speaks a lot to me in visions and pictures, and I'll feel fire in my soul, like when he's wanting me to do something. And that got unlocked as we were completely broken and he started to show up and he started to fill those holes. His presence just came in a way that we had never experienced before.
All because you put yourself in a path to connect with another vulnerable person.
In
And
the
then
past.
God starts helping you process your own stuff. Because I feel like when we engage people, some of the times, it's not all the time, but I think some of the times I will push back or someone will push back just because that person makes me feel uncomfortable. But what does that mean? That you making me feel uncomfortable actually means your stuff is stirring up my stuff. And I like it in the boxes that I've put it in. I don't want to deal with it. I hid it away. I repressed it. I did all that stuff for a reason. And now you're making my life messy. Now you're in imposition. Now you're bothering me. But God is saying, and he said this to you, it's time to deal with this. If you really want to do the thing that I've called you to do, if you really want to do the thing that you're passionate about, we got to start at home. How would you encourage people who are hearing this and they're like, yeah, but I just like giving a little money every now and then, or yeah, I just like watching documentaries and telling people I watched them. How would you encourage people who are in that place of we're a little scared to deal with our own stuff?
We share this with every survivor that comes to our house and our homes. Healing is extremely painful. It literally is this lie that we believe that the pain is going to be so bad that it's going to kill me. Hence the reason why we don't step into healing is because we honestly believe it will kill us. But on the other side of that is freedom and intimacy with the Lord. He is the prize, the goal. Like that is what we want. And he is the one who is wooing us into that healing journey so that he can reveal more of himself to us and more of who we are in him. We can't see the fullness of who we are unless we step into that hard work of healing. And what you were just talking about of like when we're feeling a trigger, so many times we want to, fragilize people or even ourselves where we're like, I'm feeling triggered, so I'm going to remove myself from this situation right now. Triggers are a gift. Triggers are a sign that, like you just said, there's something there in me that this is tugging on. Lean into the trigger. Like as hard as it is, lean into the trigger and do the hard thing. It reminds me of ice baths. You know it's going to be painful. You know it's going to really, really suck. But on the other side of it, you're getting a massive dopamine hit and it's actually healing your body. It's like that initial 5 seconds that you can't overthink it. You just got to jump in. You just got to do it. Healing is so like that.
Yeah, I was traveling and I ran into some people who were speaking English and we were talking and I couldn't get over this sickness. I'd been sick for like a month and it was not going anywhere. And the person's like, you need to go to this place. They have the cold water bath. Then they have the warm pool. Walk into the cold water bath, then get into the warm pool. They're like, you'll reset your system. And I think I did, but stepping into that cold water was awful.
Yeah.
And I might have let out this primal scream and people laughed. It was a whole thing. I was just like, ah. It was just like, it was so bad. And then I get in the warm bath and it's like skin stung. Everything felt weird. And yeah, I think when we are dealing with our own vulnerabilities, it is that initial shock of there's exposure here, there is pain, there is a trigger. But I loved what you said because we do everything we can to avoid the trigger. The trigger is just a trigger.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the stuff behind the trigger that needs to be dealt with. And as we deal with that and bring that out in the light so that we can see it, so that we can be helped with it, that's when we do start healing. But sometimes the trigger protects us.
Yes.
But sometimes it keeps us in prison too, when we just want to avoid the trigger.
Yeah.
And you went right through that trigger, it sounds like.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. We embraced it. And it truly was that 2-year journey of just unraveling and building back up and walking into that healing journey. And we're always on that healing journey too, right? It doesn't stop. We talked about this. You think you got it figured out, and then you're experiencing burnout because you're striving towards something and taking on things that are not yours to take on because they're the Lord's to take on. And then all of a sudden, our bodies are breaking down and our minds are not doing well. And we're just needing a complete and total reset. And so it's this constant journey with the Lord of intimacy with him. Nothing else matters except for intimacy with him. And then it is that overflow that enables the world to change around us.
And tell me what you mean about intimacy with God.
Yeah. I think first and foremost, it's surrendering over to the truth of who he is. I mean, I kind of experienced this in marriage too. If I don't truly see my husband, if I don't truly acknowledge who he is and see who God has created him to be and just be in awe and wonder of like, I'm missing intimacy with him. I'm missing the fullness of what I get to experience in marriage with him. And I think it's the same with God. It's first surrendering over to God. I'm going to choose to believe 100% you are who you say you are. I'm going to be in awe and wonder of who you are. Praise brings us into his courts. And so I think there's this like praise and awe and wonder that happens. And then in that, I mean, anytime that I'm not doing well in life, it's because I'm not spending time in the secret place with him. Do your biblical studies on what the secret place is. But for me, it really is spending time with him where I am opening my mind in that awe space. And I get to enter in a space with him that for me is a picture in my head of going to this room with a huge fireplace, 2 leather chairs. And it's where Abba Father meets me. He unlocked that vision a few years ago for me. And anytime I need him, that's where I go and I sit in that chair next to him and I ask him every question. Sometimes he answers and sometimes he says, not yet. But it's like that is the place that I have to go to get my cup filled. If I'm not actively going there and seeking his face and seeking that conversation with him, then that's when I start to get totally messed up and I get back into that striving mode of doing things all on my own strength.
And is this something that you try to do daily, weekly?
Yeah, daily for sure. I mean, the goal is to wake up and first thing in the morning, go to that place with him. Do I do that daily? No. I also have 4 children and I
Yeah.
really enjoy my sleep. And so it is an active to to be able to get up and do that with him, but it's absolutely crucial. It really is.
Well, you mentioned this word striving, and I think this is where we get twisted up because we make something that's about grace about what we do. And I don't know if there's control in there sometimes, but I have found that when I realize, I was telling someone yesterday that I went through something where I realized I had been holding on to God. And it wasn't until I loosened my grip that I realized how much I was being held on to. And that changed my whole relationship with Jesus because I was like, he's not going to go away if I loosen my grip. The vertical has been done away with. I am loved because Jesus lived, he died, he rose for me, even knowing that I'm not perfect. I don't have it together. I do all right sometimes, but I also make mistakes. And then realizing, okay, if that's true and he's holding on to me and he loves me, that frees me to heal. That frees me to love others. That frees me to be kind and love myself. And I think in understanding that we don't necessarily have to strive to keep him there because we've done that with so many other relationships. And honestly, that's probably the reason a lot of us need to heal because we've been trying to earn everyone else's affection. And God's saying, nah, I actually did that for you. I earned your salvation, the thing you need the most, and I give it to you freely and I give it to you graciously. How do you think we keep the balance of receiving grace versus striving for perfection or for love or purpose?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. What you just said is so good. It's so good. Man, I know. I feel like I'm constantly learning more of how to do this. When you say there's a surrender, there's this release, I get this picture of being on a cliff and total surrender to me is letting myself go off the cliff backwards and
Wow.
into him. No matter how scary this is for me or what my own self protection is, I'm going to fall back like the trust falls, right? But into the water of the Holy Spirit and allow myself to just be held. That's the picture that I get when I think about what you're talking about. There is this part of knowing who we are, right? And like, yes, knowing who he is and trusting who he says he is, but also acknowledging the fact that he has created us in his image and we are his sons and daughters and we are here to co-create with him. But it is his strength, it is his infusion in us that enables us to do everything. The passage of scripture that is rocking me right now is 1 Corinthians 3. And it's talking about division in the church, but Paul is talking about like, don't think of yourself greater than the person who lays the foundation and then the person who waters it, right? Every single one of us are a part of the collective whole, but it is the supernatural power of God that makes things grow. We can't forget that it is only by your supernatural power that all things come to be. You are the one who wills it. If I actually believe that, there is nothing I have to do to strive to do it. Even, coming onto this podcast this morning and your nerves and you're like, gosh, I want to say the right thing. I'm reading 1 Corinthians 3 this morning. And I'm like, if I truly believe that, I know that it is only through his power and his will that we're going to talk about the things that need to be talked about. It's not in me to strive and make it happen. Does that make sense?
It does. And I'm so glad you said that because I was coming to this episode too with, oh, we're going to have to say something really special.
I
And
know.
am I in the right place to say it? And honestly, I didn't feel like I was like, oh no. Part of me was like, well, maybe it's working because the moment's passed. I was like, and
I know.
and it's so funny how and I bring it up because I think we can get to these points where we overthink and
Yeah.
we just don't let God be who he is, or we forget who he is. I love how you're talking about this idea of surrender. Surrender ultimately comes when we recognize God for who he is, that he will do what he says he will do. He will keep his promises. But just as he identifies himself and tells us how he will act in the world, he shows us who we are. There's this idea of surrendering, yes, to God. Yes, he is the most high. He lived, he died, he rose for us. Well, Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, lived and died and rose for us, but he also made us who we were. And so it's like as we relax into who God is, we also can relax into who we are.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of our stress comes from when we are bigger than our bodies, when we are trying to do more than we should, when we are putting more stress on ourselves than we really need to.
Mhm.
What do you think about that?
No, I agree. I agree 100%. And I think it all comes back to surrender and believing that what he promises, he will fulfill. I'm thinking of, we moved our second location at the Herd campaign down to Denver, and I'm from Colorado. And before we knew that it was even a thing, I had a dream one night. In the dream, the Lord was asking me to come back to Colorado. And I had said I was never moving back to my home state. That was never going to happen. In the dream, I was arguing with the Lord and saying, there's nothing in me that wants to go back. And yet he told me, he said, if you do this, if you follow me back to Colorado, I will bless your family. It was that promise of I will bless your family that I was like, okay, Lord, I trust you. So in the dream, he has us moving into a mansion. There was 3 mansions on this property and has us moving into one. We're building out a program and then pass it off and the dream ends. 3 months later, I'm sitting in Denver, Colorado with some friends in the anti-human trafficking movement and they're saying, "Hey Britt, we want you to come and start an emergency shelter down here." And the property has 3 mansions. My family moved into one of them to help build this out. And it was crazy, but anytime anytime that I wanna run away, anytime when it's gotten really hard, because we know being in this, you are fighting against the craziest evil. It
Yeah.
is extremely hard. There's a lot of battles. We know we're seated in heavenly places, Ephesians 2:6, right alongside of Christ, but still we are learning how to fight from that place, and it's wearing. But anytime I wanna run, I go back to God's promise, and I stand on that. It is an anchor. He's like, "If you do this, I will bless your family." Going with what you're saying, it's believing, it's resting, it's surrender, it's anchoring ourselves into the promises of God. And biblically, even, how many promises does he have? And so, if you're not verbally hearing one in a dream, look in the word and pick the promise that sticks out to you and let that be your anchor.
Well, I want to sit with this idea of surrender just for a little bit longer. What would you say to people who are afraid of surrender? Surrender can be scary. Surrender has been something that's been coming up a lot in our episodes recently. What would you say to people or to me or to anyone who is like, I don't know, surrender sounds scary?
I think what I do is I don't play out worst case scenarios in my head, but for instance, like a promise of the Lord in the Bible, or you can use my dream. Like he is saying, if you do this, I will bless your family. And so I just think of like, okay, Lord, if I choose to believe that, like if I imagine myself being completely 100% in, and in that place, like if I actually believed you, how would that feel? What would my experience in life be like? It's always good. Another scenario I want to talk about. When we started the first safe house here in Billings, we did it out of our home, which we talked about a little bit in our previous conversation. We became a host family and integrated survivors into our home. And our family, rightfully so, right? Knowing what they knew, we're not okay with our kids being a part of this with us. And they're just like, worst case scenario, what happens if one of them is abused by these women who have been abused? One of the things in that moment of choice of surrender, when we felt like God was calling us to something, we said, even if that happens, like, even if something horrible happens, and this is hard, but do I trust to believe that you say that you are good? And do I trust that you are still redemptive? If you're asking me to do this, are you a trickster who's going to actually put us in a place of harm? Or are you doing this for our good because you say that you work all things out for good for those who love you? So if I'm going to surrender to this process and surrender to what you're asking me to, even if it means that something could happen to my kids, do I still believe that you're good and you're going to redeem it? That was a place to surrender. That was extremely hard. One of my favorite quotes from Narnia is when they're talking about Aslan and they're asking, is he safe? And they say no, but he's good. And I think surrender is like, no matter what, do I still choose to believe that you are good, that you are going to work all things out for my good? That is surrender to me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I love the Narnia quote. I love that idea that he is good, but the situations, they're not always going to bend towards our comfort. That doesn't mean we won't have seasons of comfort, that we won't feel good, but God has this way of giving us peace in the mess. God has this way of meeting us. But what I have found is that sometimes in my own life, because there may be other things going on, I won't want to do something because I'm looking down the road and being like, this is going to suck. It could be a move. It could be like a life change. It could be like, this is going to be really hard. And
Yeah.
I'm really scared. But what you said touched me because God is saying, but I'm good and I'm going to be with you. And we know the verse, the gates of hell will not prevail, even when Satan brings everything he's got, when God is there. And it's in those moments that I think it's in those moments where we don't want to surrender that we're forgetting who he is. At least that's what came up as you were talking. And when I don't want to surrender, I'm not fully realizing who God is and who he is for me.
Exactly. In that place of surrender, like you said, it's so good. He is right there with us. We get a front row seat to watch his power be on display. There's always an exchange, even with demonic stuff, like strongholds in the enemy's camp. It always takes something from us. We may get something, but it's taking something. When God is asking for our surrender, he only pours in his power and his love, and we receive only goodness with our family and kids. We got to watch the Holy Spirit work through our kids in a way we couldn't have dreamt of. And it was, we didn't teach them, nobody taught them. It just was like our surrender enabled the Lord to come and do his work and his thing. And we got to see his power on display too with the women that came here. He was showing up in their dreams, even if they didn't believe in him yet. Like, just really quickly, we had one survivor who stayed with us third night. She woke up next morning super excited, never had read the Bible, didn't know how she felt about Jesus, all this stuff. And she was like, there was a man named Ezekiel that kept coming to me in my dream last night and telling me that God was going to heal me and that he would, if I would just turn from my wicked ways, he was going to heal and restore my land. Like, it was straight out of Ezekiel. And I was like, have you ever read the Bible? And she's like, no, never picked one up. And we Googled it. I'm like, this is straight out of that. And we got to see the Lord do the craziest things in the lives of these women, our lives and the lives of our kids. And it all came from surrender. Like, it all came from willingness to do the impossible because he asked us to.
Is that how you would define surrender? This idea of willingness to do the impossible, just saying, I sense God is leading me to do this. I've had a dream or I've read a scripture that resonated with me, and I sense in my gut that this is a step I need to take, even though it doesn't make sense, even though it scares me, even though it could ruin my life, it could ruin my family's life. I'm willing to do this thing that feels insurmountable and impossible because I trust God. Is that what you mean by surrender?
I think that's definitely a huge part of surrender. Look through scripture. God asked everybody to do the craziest things. None of it made sense. He honestly is creating fools to confound the wise. Like that is like in everything he's asking us to do, right? Because it is about surrender. It's about faith. And I don't think the picture that I get is it's more so get on a tube in a river and enjoy the ride. Like, don't just take a step into the river and get your feet wet. Surrender is when you are asking me to do something. And even though this is scarier beyond reason and it doesn't make sense, get your tube and just let yourself go down the river with him. Enjoy the ride.
Or it was like when I got in that cold bath, I was just like, I put a toe in. I'm like, don't like this. Let's go. And I jumped in and it was awful.
Yeah.
But then it was kind of great. That moment of adjustment. I think it's interesting. So you surrendered, and tell us a little bit about what the Her campaign has grown into.
Yeah. So we started out of our house and again, didn't make sense. Totally dumb from a world's perspective, right? My husband and I are not social workers. I do want to say we did mentor under an organization for 3 years because we care in evidence-based practices and making sure we're not just jumping into things willy-nilly. Like that wasn't what that looked like. But we still were a young millennial couple with small children, and we integrated survivors into our home, provided wraparound resources, and then would help them get into independence. That was a 3.5-year process. We were taking women who are just coming out of trafficking, and then we had some that had been out for a while, but still just couldn't stabilize. Being on the ground level with survivors for 3.5 years, it was a humbling experience with all the trauma-informed training that we had. Each person is still so individual and unique. It was learning for us of how do we build a program that really comes alongside each person. You have your program, your structure, your policies, you do all the things, but how do we do what Jesus did and really meet each person in their own unique story and trauma? And I think we had to experience that so that we could build out a bigger process and program, right? What was crazy is that 100% of the women that came to our house stayed in our home longer than any other program they had been in. We would constantly ask for feedback, but one of the things when they were exiting, it's just like, why did this work? Or like, what was helpful? What wasn't helpful? And one of the most impactful things for each of them was you trusted us with your family. Like you invited us into your family system. We got to see the way that Sammy treated you. We got to see the way that you discipline your kids and walk through life with your kids. And it's not perfect. It was so messy. But I think, that's what discipleship is, right? It's not like sitting and grabbing coffee with someone. It's like, no, come follow me as I follow Christ in all the messiness. As I'm figuring this out, we're going to be doing this together. And so that's how we started. But through that, we realized that there really is a gap for stabilization where there needs to be a clinical and medical aspect of really coming around the person comprehensively, looking at them as a 3-part, just as the Trinity is a 3-part, right? We're body, mind, and spirit. And how do we do all 3 of those parts really well to stabilize them so they can make an informed decision for their long-term future, what they're wanting to do, what they're dreaming of? That's when we developed an emergency stabilization program, an 8-week program that is a lot more clinical and medical in nature, but also has the core of like helping them begin to know who they are in Christ and who their father is. And that's a tender process that we go through with each one of these survivors. It's a process that we let them set the pace. But God is so kind. We don't even have to say anything. We don't preach. And yet he's speaking to them. He's showing up. We had a story just a couple weeks ago where during one of our somatic exercises, one of the survivors was kind of feeling some trauma being released. And so she's laying on the floor and there's a staff member in the room with her and says, "Do you want some support?" And she said, yes. So she's closing her eyes. She's crying. The staff member is holding her right hand But after 15 minutes, the survivor opens her eyes and looks around the room and she said, "Who else is here?" And the staff member was like, "Nobody else is here." And she's like, "No, no, no. Who else is here? Somebody was holding my left hand." The staff member instantly knew what was happening. And she's like, "Who do you think that was?" And she said, "Oh my God, it was God. It was God. Like I felt his hand just like I felt your hand. It was real." And she's just like having this encounter with her father. And it's like, we didn't teach a Bible study that day. There was nothing we did. Like, he's just showing up. It's part of what the Her campaign is and what we do.
Well, I love that because at the end of the day, I think it's so important when vulnerable people connect with other vulnerable people, surrendering to the fact that the God who became vulnerable for them will show up in a tangible and real way. I think that's a lot of what we've been talking about today. God's not afraid of our mess. He's not afraid of our burnout. He's not afraid of our anxiety or our fear. He's not afraid of our inexperience. He's not afraid of our questions. And he loves us regardless. The love is free. We don't have to do anything to get him to love us. We're not going to do anything to get him to not love us. He's going to be there. He's going to love us because of who he is. It's rooted in his nature. I loved how, as much as we would talk about surrender, you would always go back to the nature of God. You surrender to, or you rest into things that you trust. You talked about the trust fall off the cliff. You talked about going into the river. When you trust the river's just going to go its way, then you're like, okay, I can ease into this. I can rest into this. I can back into this. I think that's so beautiful, but it also requires us to know that it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
It's okay to be vulnerable. And that maybe in our weakness, maybe that's where we find our strength. In these final moments, Britney, because it seems like we're talking about surrender today, how would you encourage us to surrender to God?
I think, first of all, I want to just acknowledge the fact that the battle is hard. I have been through that battle, not knowing obviously what anybody listening to this is going through, but I can relate to struggling with chronic autoimmune disease. I can struggle with invasive thoughts and this battle in your mind where you really don't believe that you could go on and that the healing is going to kill you. Like it is going to be the death of you. And it is, but not in the way that you think it's going to be. I just can relate to being at rock bottom and not seeing a way out. It was in one of those moments where I truly didn't know if I could go on. I was sitting in front of my computer and I was just trying to write out everything that was inside of me, hoping that through that process, something would come out. And as I was doing that, I heard the Lord say, "Remember that even if you make your bed in Sheol, I will be there." And it was the one verse that came to my head. And I think it's David, where he's just like, if I go to the heavens, you are there. If I go to Sheol, you are there. And what you're talking about is it doesn't matter what we do, where we go, what we think, like God is still there. He is still present. He will go to hell for us. He did go to hell for us.
Yeah.
And in that moment, that was my little piece of light where I was like, oh yeah, I remember. You are good. You will never leave me nor forsake me. The battle raging around me, the storm raging around me doesn't matter. And I just get to fall into trust. Like that's it. And it's so different because God is also so personal. He knows you better than anybody because he wove you together before the beginning of time. He thought you up and put you in your mother's womb. And every piece of you has been strategically designed by him. So he knows what you need. He knows how you need to be spoken to. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like however he speaks to you, lean in. Lean in and honestly, just ask yourself the question, if I completely fall back into that trust and allow myself to be held, what do I have to lose? In that place, you are going to see God show up in your life, and he's going to start working things out. It's going to be a journey, and it's going to be super difficult at times, but you can trust that even when it doesn't feel safe, he promises that he is good.
Yeah, I think that is a reminder that we all need. So, Britney, thanks for being on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. This is so
long
good.
time coming.
I know. Talk about battles. Like, it was a battle to get here, but we persevered and we're here.
We persevered. Yes. Thank you so much.
This has been so good.